Good evening. It is 5:15 p.m. It's March 20th, 2019, and we are going to go over the code of my digital notebook for the library book, Learning to Program from Stephen Foote. It's a pretty good book. If you're trying to learn a little bit about programming, it would be a good one to pick up. Now, I need to make this as brief as possible, but it's going to be hard because there's 9 different files that we're going to go over. And the first one, index learning to program.html, that's my landing page. That's this page right here, where all you see is a navigation on the left, an iframe for most of the rest of the page, and then this tiny little image thing over here in the right bottom of the page. After I go over that code, I'm going to go over the style.css, which is right here, that's going to stylize the landing page. I could have named these better. I could have named this learning to program landing page, and I could have named this landing page style.css, but I'm just telling you what they belong to now because I didn't think of that before I got the video rolling. Anyway, this little icon over here is actually two images stacked on top of each other, and JavaScript is being used to decide which images are going to be shown here depending on what day of the week it is. So after I go over the HTML for the landing page and the CSS on how to style the landing page, I'm going to go over the day of week .js. That's the JavaScript that shows us just exactly how can we decide to do something different depending on what day of the week it is. As well, we have the tiny image EventListener that has all of the JavaScript code that makes my image disappear and play particular things. Like if I click it once, the top image disappears and you see just the bottom image, and if I click it again, the bottom image disappears. As well, we also have two MP3 images that play along with the image disappearing too. Now let's see. Whoop, what did I want to look at next? Exclusively one styled.javascript. We're going to look at that, and we're going to see how we can take our navigation items here, which each navigation item is an anchor tag with a list item inside. And we are going to use two styles. One style is the default. So we set every single one of these list items with a class equal to unselected, and then in our CSS file we actually give certain styles to .unselected, and then by clicking on this and using JavaScript, we are going to toggle between the class called selected and the class called unselected. We're going to have two for loops, a nested for loop, two for loops, because the inner for loop is going to take away the class selected for all of these, so that each time we click something, one and only one of these, the last one that you clicked, is going to show the selected class, and all the rest of them will go back to the default. So that's an important an important style, JavaScript to look at. After that, I'm going to go to an external web page. Now, this particular book had, had 15 chapters. And when we get to chapter 15, I'm going to show you my original idea. Well, I've actually had quite a few iterations going through this process. I've made more than one change, but all of these chapters, chapter 1 through 15, open up a different HTML file in here. And originally, you could click on an H1, and I stylized my H1 header so that it had a background image on it as well. But you have an on-click event that will use a JavaScript that will segment this long MP3 file, which is nothing more than me reading the chapter, and it will segment it into the different headings that this chapter has. So chapter 15 of Learning to Program has 3 sections, main sections anyway. Version control is one of them, and object-oriented program is another, And then design patterns is the third. Well, I have a JavaScript that will segment this MP3 that when I click my design patterns, it immediately goes to that part of the MP3 reading. And if I go to object-oriented programming, it goes to where that part started. So we have a segmented MP3 file that we can use so that you don't have to listen to the whole thing from start to finish. That was my original design. My updated design is using buttons to do both calling the function that gives you the segment and also pulling in a portion of the page. So here we have the version control portion, and only the version control portion is what you will scroll when you hit the version control button. When you click the object oriented button, you only scroll object oriented programming information. And the same thing with design patterns. You're only scrolling through design pattern information. So I've been able to segment both my MP3 and sections of the web page, and I've incorporated that into these buttons with two different functions being called when you click these buttons. So let's see. So that's everything that we're going to go over. Oh, let's see. The style.css belongs to the landing page, and I apologize, there is one more. The chapter style.css is this external style sheet for 1.html all the way through 15.html, so they have their own style sheets. And then it looks like the last one here is my segmentaudio.js, the JavaScript that shows us how to segment an MP3 file. So I gave you a preview of everything we're going to go over, so let's just go over it and as quickly as possible. Because this is very time consuming, I'm going to highlight a lot of stuff and let you just pause the video and copy it and then move on. So here's everything for our landing page from the head up. Go ahead and pause this and we'll move on down to the body. Okay, from the body to before our div called nav, there's another little section. Our body on load calls daily news and add listeners. Those are two functions that as soon as the body is loaded, it calls two functions, and we'll go over those daily news and add listeners once we get into looking at the JavaScript code. The entire web page, the landing page, is all nested in a div with the ID of wrap. There are two audio players. The first one, audio with the ID equal to player, I am not actually using right now, so I have using the word hidden to hide it. But that was my first iteration of the project. I wanted to use an audio player in my landing page, and every time I changed to a different chapter, the MP3 would fill up in that audio player, and you could just click play as you scroll down the entire web page notes. But I've changed how I'm doing it, so I've hidden that control, but I've left it here in case you want to use it and make some changes in this code and you want to use it. It's already here for you. You just have to take this word hidden off or put a Z in front of it to misspell it, and it'll no longer be hidden. The next audio player I am using, though, and this audio player is called, it's got an ID of day player. The source is set to nothing because JavaScript will decide what the source is going to be, and this is an invisible player. We don't want the user to do anything with it. We want the JavaScript to decide what plays in this. So I do not have the word controls in here. Then I've got two image tags. One has the ID of myImage1 and one has the ID of myImage2, and they both have empty sources because, again, the JavaScript will determine exactly what will be the source for these image tags. Alright, so now going down to our div ID nav. Our nav is nothing more than, like I said, anchor tags with list list items inside. So we're going to use either UL for unordered list or OL for unordered list, but it doesn't really matter which one I choose because I took the list style type off anyway, and I'm just designing my list item to basically be my navigation. This is what you're going to click on and so on and so forth. So we started with an OL tag. Like I said, it doesn't matter which one you use. And from this whole section right here, this is how you make each navigation item. First, you start off with your opening A tag. This is the opening link, aref equals, and then point to 1.html. Target equals content. I have an iframe at the bottom of this page that has the name set to content. So 1.html is going to go in that iframe. There's an onClick event here that is misspelled by adding Z in front because this is how I was originally doing it. When I was using this top audio player with the ID of the audio with the ID of player, this onClick event used it. Document.getElement by ID, parentheses and quotes, player.source equals, and then I pointed to the source of the MP3 that I wanted to fill that player, which was 1.mp3. And this is how you get to it. You go into a folder called box and another folder called audio and another folder called book chapters, and voila, 1.mp3 is there. But since I have hidden that player, I have Z'd out the onClick event because it's not necessary to be there anymore. So there's the end of the opening A tag, and here is our opening list item. li ID equals 1, class equals unselected. This is mandatory. All of the list items must have the class set to unselected so that that toggle I was telling you about will work. Again, I had originally an click event that when you would click it, it would also change the background color of that particular list item. So I did that with this.style.background color equals maroon, and that was one way I could make changes happen with onClick events. But I changed my mind, so I Z'd it out, but the code is here for you to use. Title equals your first program simply gives you a hover. When you hover over it, you get a little tooltip that tells you what it is. You don't have to use that unless you want to. And then the text, your first program, is in between the opening and closing list item tags, and that's what you actually see on the list item itself. Then we have a closing A tag. Now I have to apologize because this OL tag is currently working as an OL tag because we do have the numbers here, number 1, number 2, number 3, all the way down to all of the numbers. And I have a style sheet for the landing page, and I have another style sheet for pages 1 through 15. So that's probably where I got that confused, because somewhere in my code I have overwritten the ability for OL or UL to have any of their standard defaults. But in this one I see it's still working, so that must be what I did to the other style sheet. Okay, so basically you take this whole thing and you copy and paste it for every chapter or for every link that you want to create, and then you just change the paths to what they're pointing to accordingly. So let's find the end of this div, the end of this ordered list in this div ID nav. So you basically know how to do everything in between. You just make appropriate changes for your own system. Here's the ending OL tag, the ending div tag. The next section we have is the div with the ID set to content div. And inside the content div, we have an iframe. iframe name equals content. Source is set to nothing because we want the source to be dependent on what we click, and what we click in our link is going to stick a certain external web page inside of it. So that's why the source is set to nothing. Scrolling is set to auto and frame border is set to 0. And then there's the ending frame tag and the ending div tag. After that we have our ending div tag for the wrap, the ending body tag, and in between the ending body tag and the ending HTML, I recently seen where people are putting their scripts after the ending body but before the ending HTML, and it works, so I started doing it too. So this is just a pointer to an external JavaScript. Script src equals, and this is the path that'll get you to tinyImageEventListener.js. The tinyImageEventListener JavaScript is, I have to refresh this, is going to do something with this image over here, this tiny image. So let's go ahead and look at that next. Let's look at that next. Tiny image event listeners right here. I'll close up my landing page, go to my tiny image event listener. We are creating two variables, and then we're using those variables to give them event listeners. So on line 1, var prize1 equals document.getElementById by parentheses and quotes my image 1. Remember, in the landing page I had two images and they had source set to an empty string. One of the images had ID my image 1 and the other one had my image 2. So here is where we are using JavaScript to do something with those. So on the right hand side we see document.getElementById, and we're targeting it. We're targeting this thing, and then we're just going to use prize1 as the variable everywhere in code that we need to make alterations to it. So down here you see prize1 is used with .addEventListener. We are going to, with that particular target, we are going to listen for the click event. So when you click on that little picture, we're going to call a function. Now prize1, well, I'm not going to get into which is the top and which is the bottom. That doesn't really matter. Let's just go into the function. The function has dayPlayer.play. DayPlayer is the audio player that we are using in our landing page, and we don't know what's playing until I look into the dayofweek.javascript, because based on the day of the week a certain MP3 is going to play saying what the day of the week is. This right here is just taking that and playing it here when you click on that little picture. And then this next statement, prize1.style.display equals none, makes the top picture disappear. And so this is the ending curly brace for the function, and this is the ending parenthesis for the event listener, and the semicolon closes that whole thing up, that whole section. Now we're going to do the same thing for the other image. Var prize2 equals document.getElementById, and it's targeting the image that has ID myImage2, and it's putting that target into this variable prize2. So everywhere prize2 is lit up, we're going to make a modification, or we're going to do something with our JavaScript. So we take prize2.addEventListener. In parentheses, we are going to listen for the click event, and then the function is going to be invoked. Inside of there we have prize2.style.display equals none, which is going to make that bottom image disappear. And then down here in line 16 we've got dayPlayer.source equals box /audio/days of week /oh no.mp3. This is the second image, and we want a different mp3. Dayplayer.play is going to play the day of the week. This one is giving it a new source. So because the second picture is getting ready to disappear, the MP3 is going to be, oh no, I'm disappearing, or whatever it says, something to that effect. And after we create that new source for it, now dayplayer.play is going to play something different. This dayplayer.play will play what dayofweek.javascript sets it to play. This one sets what we just previously set it to, which was oh no.mp3. So with this, you can set this to any mp3 file that you like. Okay, so there's our closing function curly brace. Here's our closing event listener curly brace, and the semicolon to wrap all of that section up. Okay, so now we're done with our tiny image event listener.javascript file. Let's close that up. Now let's check out the day of the week JavaScript. This is the JavaScript that is going to figure out what day of the week it is and then set some values to some variables. So first we create line 1, we create 4 variables with one simple statement, var day, comma picture 1, comma picture 2, comma sound. Then we have a single function called daily news, and this daily news function does get called when the landing page loads. So function daily news, empty parentheses, opening curly brace. We are using a wonderful switch statement. Switch statements are so nice and easy to understand. You have the keyword switch, and then in parentheses there's some type of statement or there's some type of thing that happens, and whatever the value of it is, we're going to compare that value to all of these case values. Here we have a case 0. So if this statement gives you the value of 0, then this matches, and then all of this will run. And then when you get to the break statement, it will jump out of the whole thing. Well, new date.getDay, when that runs, it's going to output a value of 0 to 6. 0 means Sunday, 1 means Monday, 2 means Tuesday, and 3 means Wednesday. Now we are at Wednesday, so this value will be a number 3. Case 0 doesn't match, so it gets ignored. Case 1 gets ignored. Case gets ignored. But all the way down here, number 3 matches that number 3. So all of this will run. The variable day will be set to the string Wednesday. The variable picture 1 will be set to the path of this picture, Wednesday.ping. Picture 2 will be set to this path, me.jpg, and then sound will be set to this path, Wednesday.mp3. Wednesday.mp3 is a simple little file that just says Wednesday. And then the break tag takes us out of this whole case thing. Right here's the end of the switch, so our very next line of code is this. Document.getElementById, parentheses and double quotes, myimage1.source. Now we have a source. This JavaScript gave our image a source. So myimage1 is now going to have the value of picture 1. So every single day of the week, we're going to get something different here depending on what our JavaScript finds the day of the week to be. We're going to do it again with document.getElementById, parentheses and quotes, myimage2.source equals picture 2. And finally, document.getElementById, quotes and parentheses, dayPlayer.source equals sound. So here, dayPlayer has the source set to sound. That's why in the previous JavaScript, we could just hit dayPlayer.play, and this line of code is what caused it to have a source to know what to play. Then right here, this curly brace is the end of the daily news function. So with that, we are done with the dayofweek.js JavaScript file. Now, before we get into the individual pages, let's look at the style.css for the landing page. And I'm going to go through this really fast, so you'll probably need to pause. And I think the fastest way to do this is to try to highlight a page at a time. So here, this entire page shows you the styles for the body in HTML, the styles for the div with the ID of wrap, and the styles for the audio tag. So go ahead and pause this, get all that information down, because I'm getting ready to move on to the next screen. Further down the page actually. So now we're going to have, I can't get much more than the nav here because there's a lot of stuff. So I'll just let you pause this for all of the information that's in between the nav curly braces. The div with the ID of nav gets all of these. Now moving on, we're going to look at the list items inside of the div with the of nav. And that is a lot. I need to make my text a little smaller. There, everything on the screen right now gives you the styles for the list item inside of the div with the ID of nav. Pause it because I'm moving on. What's next? Next we have the div with the ID content div, and we also have all of the styles for the iframe. So pause it and we're ready to move on. After the iframe, I just have some notes about box shadow and a link, a visited, a hover, a active, if you want to stylize each of those states of your link. But I didn't use any of those, all that's just commented out. What I did use, however, I have styles here for my link, styles for my span, styles for my ordered list, and styles for my unordered list. Pause it and move. If you want to do a nav list item hover, you can use this commented out code. Just take the comments off of either side. I didn't. I was going to initially, but then I didn't. But here in the center of the page, you have styles that the image with the ID myimage1 and the image with the ID myimage2, they're sharing a bunch of styles in between these curly braces. All right, now I'm going to move down because we're almost done with this style.css. Again, all of these styles are for the landing page. Okay, here we have styles for just myimage2. Because myimage1 and myimage2 are fixed and they're stacked exactly on top of each other in the exact same location, they need a z-index, and one has to be a higher number than the other because they're stacked. If they don't have a different z-index, they will be covering each other up. They have to be stacked. You have to give them a stack layer basically, and that's what the z-index does. It gives you a stack layer. Then you have your nav, your div with the ID of nav, and here these two items, the li.selected and then this one down here, the li.unselected, your list item on your landing page has class equals unselected by default. So by default, all of these guys are this color gray, and this is the style that they have. But when we incorporate these CSS styles and the JavaScript in exclusively one style.javascript, which I'll read next, it jumps back and forth and toggles between these two styles, between selected and unselected. Again, this is the default, and this is what happens. It gets a transform, translate, rotate, which it didn't do anything with the translate, but it did do a rotate to give it a tilt, and it gave it a darker gray background. Both the selected and the unselected have the padding set to the same amount as well. Okay, so we're done with style.css. Let's look at this. This is how we toggle between the selected, and then you click and you get this selected, but then this goes back to unselected, and that way you see that there's only one chapter being shown at any given time. That's what this does. Function, add listeners, and there's a whole lot of commented out stuff in between. The only thing we're interested in the stuff that's highlighted. So line 1, function add listeners, empty parentheses, and opening curly brace. If and in parentheses window.add event listener, if that's true, that means your browser has the ability to add event listeners, so then it will continue on with the code. The next is var my list items equals document.query selector all, and in parentheses and single quotes dot unselected. So what this does is, it's like document.getElementById, it targets an element with a certain ID. This one wants to target every element in your web page that has the default of class equals unselected. The only thing that we gave class equals unselected was our list items that were inside of link tags. So this is going to target all of them. This is going to target all of them, and then we're going to use this variable to represent all of them. So var my list items equals document.query selector all parentheses and quotes dot unselected. Now, if you've been paying attention to the comments, which you didn't need to, but if you have, this gives a definition of what the next line of code does, and that is to loop through all of your target elements. So here we've got our for, and in parentheses var I equals 0, I less than my list items dot length I plus plus, and then we open up another curly brace. Here I want to highlight that again. I like that highlighted while I'm reading it to pronounce where all it's being used. So line 26, var list item equals my list items index I. Notice the I in the square brackets. Basically, we are creating a new variable that will, because we're in a loop and we're doing one list item at a time, we are going to take the very first list item, which I would be 0. My list items index 0 would be the first one on top, and then we're going to give it the value list item, and then we're going to do something to it at that point by using the new variable list item. And that's where we go down to line 29, and we're going to bind the click event to call this function. So we use list item dot add event listener, and in parentheses we have the click event. That's what we're listening for, the click event, and then we use function and in parentheses event and another opening curly brace. Let's move on down. Then we have an inner for loop. This is important. The inner for loop removes the CSS style from all elements, so it is only going to show the CSS style class on the most current element clicked instead of all of the elements that have been clicked. Because otherwise, if we didn't have this inner for loop, you would click one of the navigation list items and it would get the tilt in the darker gray, and then you would click the next one and it would get a tilt in a darker gray, and you would click it until eventually all of them had the dark gray tilt. Well, we don't want that. We want only what we're looking at, only the chapter we're currently on to have that. So we have the inner for loop. For parentheses var I equals 0, I less than my list items dot length I plus plus, another opening curly brace, and then we create another variable for the inner for loop. Now we're creating var list item equals my list items index I. So now on the inner for loop we're going to use list item 2 to remove the class. List item 2 dot class list dot remove parentheses and double quotes selected. Then here's the curly brace that closes the inner for loop. And then we have another statement in line 39 that says this dot class list dot toggle parentheses and double quotes selected. So now we're going to toggle between the default unselected class and the selected class. So finally we have our closing curly brace for the function right here. Then we have the closing parenthesis for the event listener right here. Then we close that up with our semicolon. The next closing curly brace is the closing for the outer for loop. Here's the inner for loop. The outer one is way up here, so you see it's highlighted in yellow. And the very last one here, well, it's not the last, I don't think, no. This closing curly brace belongs to the end if, which is here. And then further down we'll have one final closing curly brace, and that'll be for this function add listeners. Once I click it, I just have to click on the pointy part of it, on the outside of the curly part, to highlight it. And so that ends this entire function add listeners, which is again called on the landing page's body on load event. Okay, so we're done with exclusively one style.js. I can move out of that. Okay, I've got 4 more files to look at. What do I want to do first? Let's look at 15.html. This is what the individual web pages looked like before the improvement. So again, let's try to do this as quickly as possible. If you need to pause the video so that you can get the code down, please do, because I don't want to do this any longer than I have to. We have a unique style for just the 15.html because every single web chapter is going to have its own background image for the H1. So here is its background image path, and these are and they're inside. So even though we are using chapterstyle.css, it's an external sheet that I'm going to read next. We also have some styles to override them to make it completely unique to just this. Not only every one.html through 15.html, but also this is just for 15.html. This is just for 15.html, this paragraph and span. And this is just for 15.html's pre-tag. So there's the end of the style for that. We can close that up. End of head, opening body. We have div with the ID of content, which is going to hold everything in here. Then we have a div, an opening and closing that you can see. You can see the pair with the ID of hide radio. Inside we have our audio. ID equals my audio, source equals, and then you see the path to the 15.mp3. We do want to see the controls for the user, and then we have it set to preload so that it would load that 15.mp3 as soon as possible. And then you close that div up. After that, we start talking about information in the web page. So we have an H1 header, and the first piece of information that Chapter 15 talks about is version control. So that's going to be what you see, the text that you're going to see on the H1. The H1 is also going to have that background image, and it's also going to have an on-click event, because this was the original idea for my individual web pages. On-click equals play segment, and then in parentheses we have two arguments, 0, 1521. What this is doing is it's calling a function that we haven't looked at yet, play segment. And when we get into this external JavaScript segment audio.js, we will see what the play segment looks like. But this is calling it. If you click on the H1 header, you're going to call this play segment function. You're going to give it a beginning seconds and ending seconds for the version control segment that is being read on the MP3. That's all that does. And inside of p tags, you have some information. Inside of table tags, you've got table rows that have table headers and table data cells. Every table row, some of them are done the same, some of them are done a little bit different. In this table row, we've got a table data cell with a call span set to 2 so that it spreads across 2 columns. And inside of that, we have a pre-tag so that you have some what you see is what you get coding in there. And well, I don't want to go into all of this, how to make a table, because if you know anything about web pages, you already know how to make a table. So there's the end of the table. And here's the beginning of the next section. H1s, the headers are basically just like a book or a newspaper or anything else. The header basically gives you the topic of what the next bit of information is going to be about. So this header is about object-oriented programming, and it also has the on-click event pointing and calling play segment. But this is going to give us seconds 1521 to seconds 1858 for this particular read segment. Again, there's some paragraph information and some table information. Ending table. Last section for chapter 15, H1 header, on click equals play segment. Seconds 1858 to seconds 2252. The name of the header is design patterns. The paragraph talks about it, the table talks about it, and the end of the table, we are now at the end of 15.html. We have a foot. Before we get to the very end of the page, we have a foot. So let me open up and go to page 15 really quick. Here's an H1 header, version control. I click it, my MP3 starts reading. And I stopped it so I wouldn't have to hear it, but you would see the seconds keep going. It's going to read all of this information, these tables and these pre-tags and paragraphs and all this other stuff, list items, until it gets to this piece of information. When I click this header, This is the first part read from here to here. This is where this part starts. So it starts my MP3 here, and then I've got more paragraph information and more table information. Then I have design patterns, and that starts here. And here's the H1 header tag, a paragraph, and a table. And like I said, there's different ways to make your table look different, columns and how you style your table data cell and your table header. And this right here is my foot. So let's get to my foot. Div ID equals foot. Inside of my foot, I have, this is a link tag. This is your anchor tag. The opening anchor says a ref equals, and it's pointing to an MP4 video file. It's targeting blank. Underscore blank means it's going to open it in a new tab. Title means it's going to give you a little tooltip when you float your mouse over top of it. But inside the opening and closing anchor tag, we have an image. That means the image is clickable. Anything you stick inside of an link tag becomes clickable, just like these became clickable because we put list items inside of your anchor tags. It made these also not just list items, but clickable links. Same thing with this image. Image source equals, and I'm pointing to a logo that I have inside of an images folder. So when I click on my foot logo, it's going to open a video in a new tab right there. Okay, so that's how that part worked. I'm using, this is the closing of that. I'm using a break tag so that I have a little space in between that image link and this span that has my name and copy 2019. The and symbol, the word copy, and the semicolon is the way that you would be able to make this symbol right here. Alright, so we end our foot div, we end our content div, we end our body, and then we also point to that segmentaudio.js JavaScript file that I haven't went over yet, but I'm going to shortly, that segments our MP3 into multiple parts. There's the ending HTML. So we're done with how the individual chapter pages were created. 1 through 15 were all created like this, but I did make an improvement. Really quick before I get into that JavaScript, let's look at the chapter style.css. This external CSS stylizes chapter 1 through chapter 15. So 1.html all the way to 15.html. They're pointing to this one. Style.css, the landing page was pointing to, but 1 through 15 was pointing to this one. So let's try to make this as quick as the other. These are the styles for the body and the HTML. That's for the div with the ID of content. This is a lot. That's everything for the H1 tag. Here you've got everything for the H3 tag, which is another header. It's just a smaller header. H1 is the largest header. H3 is smaller. H6 is the smallest header. For the paragraph and span tags, those are the styles inside of those curly braces. For link, whether it's visited or not, I gave it a color of purple. I didn't want it to change colors whether it had been visited or not, so I did that. I didn't care about hover, and I didn't care about active. I think active is only while you're pressing, while the button is being pressed in, and so I really don't understand why that's exciting, but I guess for event listener purposes. Okay, and in here for my B tag is to bold, and I gave it a color and a font size. My field set, a class of mini. Moving on down, there's all the styles for the text area. Moving on down, there's all the styles for the pre-tag, which again, the text area and the pre I was using for the same thing to give a what you see is what you get effect on the web page, but the pre does not allow the user to type anything over that element. The text area does. Everything for the table, everything for the table header, everything for the table data cell. Now, I was messing around with tables so much that I came up with lots of this and that's for tables. So you could ignore this or you could try to use it, but this was for a table that I gave the ID make this fit. And then this was make this fit table header, followed by make this fit table data cell. Then I wanted to change it up again, and I created a ID of make this fit for table again. And I'm sorry, make this fit 8, and then make this fit 8 table data cell, make this fit 8 table data cell pre-tag. And then I was trying to make life simpler by creating classes where I would only change certain portions, thinking that that would make everything else automatically line up, but that didn't necessarily happen either. So this class thirds, class thirds th, class thirds td, class halves th, and class quarter didn't necessarily give me what I expected it to. Maybe I wasn't using it correctly. Okay, for the unordered list and the ordered list, they share those styles. Then for the unordered list items, the unordered list items and ordered list items, they have these styles. Now this is what I was talking about when I said both the unordered list and ordered list, it didn't matter because here list style type is set to none because I wanted a background image to be used instead. And the div ID hide radio audio has these styles, and this was important because the audio player looks different if you open up your web page in Firefox than it does when you open your web page in Chrome. And doing this didn't make them look identical, but at least I was able to size the height. Instead of one being really tall and rounded and the other one being real narrow, not narrow, but the height was taller on the Google Chrome than it was on the Firefox. And so when I wanted it to fit my page neatly and small, I had to do this. So I stuck my audio player in a div and then I stylized the div to force it to do what I wanted it to. And here is the audio hover if you feel the need to use that. I only used it for the purpose of testing because I was playing around with Z indexes and my buttons were slightly over my audio player, and so when I was trying to utilize my audio player it wasn't letting me. So once I got a hover and I seen that my hover was working, then I knew I had access to my audio player and my buttons were far enough away from it. Okay, here are the styles for an image tag, and here are the styles for class tiny, which is for my footer logo, but somehow I don't think that's working properly. Then for my foot, any span tags that I have in there, there's styles for that. And for the foot div itself, there's more styles than I think I need. And then that's all there is. Okay, so those are all the styles for 1.html all the way through to 15.html. Done with that. This segmentaudio.js is a nice little ditty that lets me segment a single MP3 audio file and use my segments. So the first line of code is var odd equals document.getElement by ID parentheses and quotes my audio. On the landing page, we have an audio player with the ID set equal to my audio. So here, no, I take that back. This is not for the landing page. This is for the audio player on all of the external chapter pages, 1.html all the way through to 15.html. All of those pages have an audio player with the ID My Audio. Sorry, I'm sorry about that mistake. So here we're targeting those, and then we're going to give it this variable name odd. So everywhere odd is lit up, we're going to do something to that. We're also going to create another variable called segment end, and you can see where all it's lit up. But let's keep odd lit up, and let's go over the rest of this code. Again, line 3 says var segment end. Then we use odd with .add event listener to give it an event listener, and then in the parentheses it's going to listen. What event is it going to listen for? It's going to listen for an event called time update. Okay, after that we have the word function, an empty parentheses, and an opening curly brace. Line 6, we're down to an if condition. If, and in parentheses, segment end and odd.currentTime are greater than or equal to segment end. If that's true, then your audio will pause. Odd.pause. There is the ending curly brace for your if condition. If you're still in the middle of playing, it's not reached the end of that particular segment, then you can use console.log and parentheses odd.currentTime to see what the current time is. I guess this is if you're not using a visible audio player, because you can see what the current time is by looking at the audio player, but where I got the code had this, so I kept it in. I didn't get rid of it. This is the closing curly brace to the function here. Then there's a parenthesis in the word false before you get to the ending parenthesis for the event listener. And finally we have a semicolon. So this whole bit of code is all basically all together. It's the event listener for the variable called odd that points to all of the audio players on all of those chapter pages that have the ID of My Audio. Next we're going to look at this little section. It's a function and it's called play segment. Play segment is the function that was originally called on chapter 1 through chapter 15 on the on-click event of the H1 element. So here the name of the function is play segment, and in the parentheses we have two parameters, one start time, a comma, and the second parameter is end time. So when we saw the play segment being called, something in parentheses, there was a seconds, a number indicating seconds, like 0 to 12:55 or whatever the case was. So inside of the block of this function, the first thing we do is the value of this parameter, whatever that end time seconds number is, that's going to be to this variable segment end that's used all over the place up here. The second statement is going to take the value of start time when that function is called, and it's whatever that may be. It might be 0 if it's the first segment. If it's 0, that will be set to odd.currentTime. Since odd represents all of those audio players, odd.currentTime, if that were 0, that means that would be the first segment. If it started at 12:85, that would be where it would start. After we've figured out the start time and end time for the audio, for that odd that's representing that audio player, we can finally play it with odd.play. Then there's the ending curly brace for the function play segment. And that's all there is to the segment audio.javascript. There was two things. We had a function called play segment, and we had an event listener for the variable odd that was targeting all players on the individual web pages. Now, last but not least, let's look at the new and improved chapter 15. This was the chapter 15 where we click on the H1 header to get the segment. The new improved chapter 15 not only gives us a segment of the MP3, but it also gives us buttons that only pull up that segment of the page that we want to look at. So if we click version control, that starts to play immediately, and we scroll only the information about version control. We click object-oriented programming. That immediately starts at the position that it belongs, and it only gives us the object-oriented programming information to scroll through. Same thing with the design patterns. You're only looking at design pattern information. And the reason that this makes it so much better is that you don't have an entire page worth of information to scroll with your scroll bar. And if this is a digital notebook and you want to refer to it later, it's a lot easier to go to the chapter and then go to the subtopic than it is to go to the chapter and go up and down trying to find exactly what it is that you need to pinpoint. I don't have code for search yet, but when I learn how to incorporate search with my website here, website, I guess you can call it a website, but when I learn how to do that, then I will incorporate a video for doing that. I just haven't done that yet. All right, so anyway, back to the code for the improved external web page. Let's make it quick. Here's all the doc type declaration and what everything points to. Inside of the style, we have everything for our H1, everything for our paragraph or span. These are styles. The styles for the pre-tag, the styles for the body and the HTML. The margin, padding, width, and height are all important for these two. The body has overflow hidden with a background color. Overflow hidden is important for this. We have a div with the ID of fixed buttons. That's holding our buttons right here. All of the divs, we have multiple divs. Well, we've got 3 divs, one for each of the subtopics, and this stylizes all the divs. So there's the end of the style and the end of the head. Let's go on down to the body. Here's the same thing that was in the regular chapter 15 .html. We just have div ID equals hide radio, and then audio ID equals my audio, and this has to point to a particular MP3 file that we want to segment for this page. We're giving it control so the user can see it, and it's preloaded so that it loads quicker than by the time we get to it. Here's our div ID set to fixed buttons, and we have 3 buttons. Here they are: input, type equals button, value equals version control, on click. Now this is where we take the play segment from the H1 and now we stick it in this button on click event, and the play segment is the name of the function, the parameters, well, the arguments to the parameters. Instead of it saying start time and end time, we have a 0, 1521, which represents the start time and the end time, and then a semicolon. But then before the play segment, we have this window.scroll, parentheses 0, comma, find pause, parentheses document, get element by ID, parentheses D1. What the heck is that? Well, at the bottom of this page, we have another function called find pause, which is short for find position. And just like this function play segment had parentheses with parameters in it, the find pause is a function that in its parentheses, it has a parameter too. So just like 0, 1521 were arguments to the play segment's parameters, then document.getElementById D1 is the argument to the find pause's parameters. And then this window.scroll, parentheses 0, comma, the find position is going to help us with our scroll so that we only scroll from here to here. Then we have our second button, input, type equals button, value equals object-oriented programming, on click equals window.scroll, parentheses 0, comma, find pause, parentheses document.getElementById, parentheses quotes D2, plus, we don't have a plus symbol, but we're also going to call, not only are we going to do all this, we're also going to call play segment with the values of 1521 to 1858 being that MP3 segment. Then the final button, input type equals button, value equals design patterns, on click equals. And notice that we have double quotes here and then closing double quotes way over here. we have semicolons that show you the end of each command, statement, whatever you want to call it. So when you look for semicolons, you're looking basically at the end of a chunk of code that belongs together. It's kind of like a pyramid on a period on a sentence. Window.scroll, parentheses 0, comma find pause, parentheses document identified by ID, parentheses D3, close, 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 semicolon, play segment, parentheses 1858 to 2252. What is D1, D2, and D3 though? Well, we haven't got that far yet because we haven't seen, well, here it is. Boom, this close. But before we get there, you see here's the ending div to that div ID fixed buttons. So we have a div that holds our three buttons and positions them where we want them to be positioned. But as far as that D1, D2, and D3, because they're part of a function call, this is where they reside in the web page. Div ID equals D1 from 93, and this was a long one. Remember that first section was a really long one, to 195. So by using that element with an ID, we're able to control the button just pulling up just this amount of information. There's our, just like in our regular 15.html page, there's our H1 that says version control, but this time we didn't have an on-click event on it. We stuck that up here on our buttons. We called play segment with a button instead of the H1, which makes more sense because people don't generally assume that they can click on a title and get anything to happen. They generally assume that if you click on a button, something's going to happen. There's a paragraph, there's our table, and all the stuff in the table, all the way down to the end of the table and the end of that div with the ID D1. Here's the next section, div ID equals D2. Same deal. You have your H1 that says what we're going to be talking about, our paragraph that talks a little bit about it, and our table that talks a little bit about it. Get to the end of the table, the end of the div, that whole section's done. Here's the div ID equals 3, design patterns, paragraph, table, information, end table, end div, end body. Now we're going to get to see the find pause function. Opening and closing script tag, because we're putting our JavaScript right in this page. So just like when you put CSS right in the HTML, you have to put it inside of style tags. When you put your JavaScript inside of an HTML file, you have to put it in script tags. So here, this function is going to find y value of given object. Okay, X is left to right. Y is top to bottom. So since we're scrolling from top to bottom, that's why it says finds Y value of given object. And the given object, each given object is going to be those divs with a div ID of D1, D2, and D3. So the function is find pause. In parentheses, we have a parameter called obj, short for object, and you see everywhere that it's lit up. Then an opening curly brace. Line 279, var cur top, which I'm sure is probably short for current top, equals -50. And then we have an if condition, if parentheses obj.offset parent. Then we're going to go down here after this opening, after this opening curly, and we're going to do a do while loop. Do opening curly cur top plus equals obj.offset top. Then you close up the do block with this curly, and after that you have a while, parentheses obj equals obj.offset parent. And after that statement you have return, and you have cur top in square brackets. Then you have this closing curly for the if block, the closing curly for the function, the ending script tag that holds the function, and then you have another script link pointing to segmentaudio.js. This is pointing to the external segment audio.js, and then your ending HTML tag. So with that being said, I've just went over 9 files with you that shows basically my different iterations of making a digital notebook out of a library book. So it's kind of like getting 2 bits of learning in one. One, you're learning information from a library book, and 2, you're practicing your web page development. So I hope this helped anybody out with anything you might be trying to do. If you've never gotten into trying to do this, it's it's interesting if you ask me. So hopefully this video will get you interested in at least tampering with web page design. Even if there's Wix, we still like to learn how to do stuff ourselves.